From the outset, Israel's assault on Gaza threatened to plunge the entire region into a state of war. When Israel's defense minister announced in mid-September that the military would turn its focus from the southern border and Gaza to the northern front, diverting forces to the fight with Hezbollah, few could have imagined how quickly Lebanon would be consumed. What has unfolded in just a few weeks has shocking echoes of what we have seen so far in Gaza. Thousands have been killed. More than half a dozen hospitals have been forced out of service. 1.2 million people have been displaced from their homes. The Lebanese have been subjected to constant psychological warfare from Israel, messaging that aims to intimidate and sow discord in society there. One voice helping audiences make sense of rapidly changing events is Karim Makdisi. An associate professor of international politics at the American University of Beirut, Karim, along with his brothers Sari and Osama, is also a co-host of the podcast Makdisi Street. Karim Makdisi, thank you for joining us at The Listening Post. I'd like to start with the message, or the ultimatum rather, that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued this past week. He said Lebanon should free itself from Hezbollah or face, quote, the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. What did you make of that statement? How has that been reacted to by Lebanese society?
Yes, well, the Netanyahu statement, of course, I think it's been read in two different ways. On the one hand, people understand that it's part of this kind of terror campaign to try to force the Lebanese and Lebanon in general to its knees and to end up signing some kind of surrender agreement after much of Lebanon has been destroyed. People are also aware that there's a kind of propaganda element. I mean, the idea that he's speaking in English is clearly directed to the West, is clearly part of this larger Israeli kind of tactics to try to, say, oh, look, we've warned you, we've pleaded with you, we've, given you strong warnings, weak warnings, everything. And you're the ones who are not listening. So therefore, you give us no choice but to destroy you and kill you and kind of divide you up. So this is the attempt. Netanyahu and all these Israeli politicians, ever since I can remember, and going back to being a kid, up until now, up until this last year, every day or every other day or every week, we hear statements by Gallant or Netanyahu or, Smotrich basically say we're going to destroy Lebanon.
אם חלילה תתפתח פה הסלמה או אירועים מלחמתיים, אנחנו נחזיר את לבנון לעידן האבן.
Beirut, as you know, is being destroyed. Much of the south is destroyed. Large parts of the Bekaa are being attacked and destroyed. So, of course, in a sense, the idea that what's now being called the Gaza Doctrine is being applied to Lebanon is quite clear. What people are worried about is that the international community has abandoned Lebanon and that you're in this stage of kind of power politics where they can just destroy as much as they want at will and kind of, extend this Gaza Doctrine into Lebanon.
Indeed.
This is where we are now.
Both Israel and Hezbollah are engaging in psychological warfare online. On the Israeli side, the army's Arabic spokesperson, Avichai Adrai, he has been relentless. Can you give us a sense of what he's saying and how that is designed to make Lebanese citizens feel?
Yeah, I think it's clear that on the one hand, what he's designed to do is to intimidate and, as I said, to terrorize, which is the main Israeli kind of tactic in Lebanon these days. It's to purely to try to terrorize the civilian population.
إلى سكان جنوب لبنان ديروا بالكم. يستمر جيش الدفاع في مهاجمة مواقع حزب الله الإرهابي داخل قراكم وبالقرب منها.
They put up these little maps. As they did in Gaza, and here are the districts that we're going to blow up and that we're going to attack. So you have, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, to kind of move out of this entire territory. And usually this is in the middle of the night with very, very short notice. And then they proceed to attack and destroy buildings and civilian infrastructure and entire neighborhoods. They understand very clearly the psychological idea behind kind of slowly clearing out neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood in Beirut and extend beyond the so-called, what they call Hezbollah areas into kind of the adjacent areas, as they've done in Gaza and as they've done in 2006 war in Lebanon, as they did in 1982. So this stuff is very old. What this spokesperson, attempts to do is to try to create a kind of psychological terror and a facade to the West in particular that they're being precise and targeted and they're, getting civilians to flee.
When you observe Hezbollah's messaging to the Lebanese people, it's gone from a narrative based around a commitment to Gaza to the reality of an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. How is Hezbollah trying to shore up its support in Lebanon?
Well, I think now it's portraying itself and portraying the battle to Lebanon as an existential one. So it's true. It maintains its idea, its overall objective and idea that it will remain fighting the Israelis until there's a ceasefire in Gaza, until the genocide in Gaza ends. So that's still their official position. But yes, for now, the main issue is an existential threat to Lebanon as they see it, not just to them as Hezbollah, but to Lebanon as a whole and to the region as a whole. I think operationally, what their message to the Lebanese and especially their constituents are, as Hassan Nasrallah said before he was killed, that al-Haki bil Maidan. The talk now is really on the ground. It's in the battlefield in South Lebanon in particular, and the idea is to try to defend Lebanon with all its might from the Israeli invasion, and to kind of stop it as they did in 2006. From creating a reality on the ground, which is another occupation, while trying at the same time to say that people are suffering, that their constituents in particular are suffering, and that there needs to be reconciliation in the sense of people in solidarity with each other. So I think these are the kinds of the main messages, while at the same time trying to put forth that they are rebuilding their structure even in Beirut, that they've kind of understood what the Israelis are doing now, and that they've addressed this. And that all the military leaders have been replaced, the political leaders have been replaced, and that they are trying to address the kind of Israeli intelligence that penetrated and caused some very serious problems to the Hezbollah structure and leadership.
Lebanon is, of course, not Gaza. There are a number of international journalists who are reporting in Beirut. Has that made any noticeable difference to the quality of international news coverage of what's happening in Lebanon?
Yes, I would say it's slightly more in the sense of it's very difficult when the Israelis are hitting civilian targets and blowing up buildings and hitting entire neighborhoods. And when you see much more than 1 million now displaced Lebanese all over Beirut and all over different parts of Lebanon now, it's easier in a sense even for Western journalists to kind of come in and do some of their human interest type stories when they talk to people and they see the level of destruction and they kind of film the destruction in ways that they're not allowed to do in Gaza anymore. In Lebanon, it's been a little bit more difficult for the Israelis to kind of portray their image that they're only targeting Hezbollah, that they're only assassinating Hezbollah leaders, that civilians are not really being attacked. I think journalists are showing this. Having said that, I think it's very, very important to also, note that the structure of Western coverage of Palestine, of Lebanon, and the region in whole has been very much coming from politically from a Zionist perspective. That is, despite some of these human interest stories, it's still very clear that many Western journalists are using Israeli jargon. They kind of, falsely report about the idea of targeted killings. They falsely report about, for example, the Dahi, the southern suburbs of Beirut, being kind of Hezbollah strongholds. They falsely report about Israeli words like incursion into Lebanon as opposed to invasion. And so the overall framing tends to be quite Zionist, despite the fact that there are some good human interest type stories, and despite the fact that they can see with their eyes the kind of damage that's taking place on the ground.
And finally, Karim, some of the discourse in Israel and in the United States amongst politicians and media opinion makers, it has a very 2003 feel to it. When the US launched its war on Iraq, this talk of a, quote, historic opportunity to remake the Middle East. What motivates these pronouncements? Is it delusion or is it just standard propaganda?
No, it's I don't know if it's either. It's hubris. I would take them very seriously when they say they want to create a new Middle East. As you said, in 2003, they had a long standing from the 1990s, very much from Bill Clinton onwards, to try to do regime change in Iraq. They used the pretext of September 11, 2001 to kind of operationalize, let's say, or implement the plan that they had to do regime change in Iraq, to try to reorder the Middle East by force and remove any elements of opposition to the American-Israeli project in the region. They totally destroyed Iraq. They dismembered the entire Iraqi state. There was massive resistance, huge amount of violence, many hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people killed and displaced and injured and refugees. That then, the plan was very clear, to spill over to Lebanon, and by doing so, destroy Hezbollah, and then get on to Syria. And then after Syria, the ultimate goal was to topple the Islamic Republic in Iran. That failed in South Lebanon, ironically, during the 2006 war. And the failure of the Israelis and even the Americans on the battleground in South Lebanon stopped that project from kind of going forth. We now see a revival of that kind of plan. We see the revival of the language, the discourse of talking about a new Middle East. Netanyahu is saying it in the way that the neocons were saying it back in 2003. You see even people, even now the Biden administration are beginning to use these words directly or indirectly. We know that the Biden administration has now lent its full support to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. So it's a continuation of a long-standing American-Israeli policy in the region of regime change, of rather than trying to negotiate, to try to impose by force a reordering of the region in a way that they see protects Israel's interest, imposing an Israeli-controlled region where there can be no opposition. We need to take them seriously. You can see going all the way back to the Nakba and before the Nakba, the long attempts to try to settle by genocide, by occupation, by displacement, by ethnic cleansing, and certainly by violence of every kind, in addition to relying on Western support. And we see now a kind of continuation of this. The idea that there should be a new Middle East requires the destruction of Lebanon, regime change in Lebanon, and then Syria, and eventually this kind of attack on Iran. So this is what we see, and I think we should take them seriously.
Karim, thank you very much for speaking with us today. And thanks to you and your brothers for the work that you do with your podcast.
Thank you.